Okay, welcome back to the sauna, seeing as that's what you all call it. Let's just go with that. And what I want to do tonight is do what I did last night on the Patreon channel, and I was just experimenting with it, but going through the whole of the agreement between the UK and the EU, the trade and cooperation agreement, and give you an overview of all of that kind of structure, and then end like on science and spend a little bit more time on that and give you my summary thoughts. And so, of course, like many other people, I've been drinking up all the analyses left, right, and centre, and then making tons of notes on them. So the basic structure of this, I kind of borrowed from the Institute for Government, but instead of all of their different categories, what I want to do is go through the overview and governance, then goods and transport, because those two go together, services and mobility, the level playing field and how that kind of regulates those first two, fishing, then law and order, and then science, including energy, intellectual property, and data. What have we got in here? What's it mean? Someone's already kicked off with, how shit is this deal? Well, actually, it's pretty shit, but, you know, wait till the end for that. Right, whiskey, nice. Yeah, this is the last of it, then I need to get another bottle. Right, so I will do this faster than I did it last night, which was more long and ponderous and discursive. So let's just crack on with the overview of what we've got here. Right, this is a trade and cooperation agreement, and it's based on three fundamental pillars. One is the FTA pillar, which is all about the economic and social partnership. It's, you know, the goods, the services, mobility, buying into programs. That's pillar one, the FTA. Pillar two is the cooperation in law enforcement and justice and security matters and judicial matters, civil and criminal. Okay, so that's your law and order. And then the third pillar is about all the different mechanisms with regard to what happens if we fall out over some of these issues. And so that's a big old set of mechanisms that, as you'll see, has quite a lot of nuclear options bedded into it. And then on the side of those three pillars, we've actually got the agreement with Euratom tacked on the side. Because that's a different treaty, we've just got an agreement with that treaty, okay? So that's the structure of it. And then the question becomes, okay, what's the overall governance design of this? Now, there's no role for the ECJ in this anymore. Asterisk, I'll come back to asterisks later. However, it is all run by a partnership council where you've got UK officials and EU officials. But under that partnership council, you've got some 30 sub-councils, each focusing on lots and lots of different parts of the agreement. So as I was going through, you know, chapter and chapter and area, I kept thinking, what are all these committees and sub-councils that are how many of them are there? But IFT have done the work, and it's 30 of them. And it makes me wonder, what's the cost of this? We used to have 73 MEPs, but if you've got 30 sub-councils that then can convene other people, you wonder how many millions of pounds this is going to be per annum for just this interface mechanism. But anyway, things get resolved in this partnership council. Disagreements get resolved in this partnership council. If they can't agree things amicably in the partnership council, then there are some options. Option number one is your independent arbitration tribunal, and that's kind of convened in a bespoke way. You know, you bring in the right people for that particular issue. It just gets set up for that, and they have 160 days to issue a ruling on that. If there's no compliance from the other party, then you can have suspension of the whole trade and cooperation agreement. So that can really blow up there. But there are some areas where you don't convene those arbitration tribunals. For example, in fisheries, in subsidies, illegitimately using subsidies, in law and security. Basically, in this agreement, there are inbuilt mechanisms that if one party feels aggrieved by what the other's doing, then they can put on their own sort of tariffs and retaliatory measures there as it goes to arbitration by a different subcommittee, right? If there are bigger, broader breaches in trade, then it can go to the WTO. And if there are breaches on key issues such as climate change, rights and democracy, parts of the agreement can even be suspended. And the Partnership Council reviews the agreement every 5 years. So, in 2026, there'll be a big review. I saw one lawyer say this whole deal is basically a truce until 2026. Now, I said before about the asterisk, and that is that the ECJ does apply in 2 areas. One is Northern Ireland, which is still in the single market, and there is the Northern Ireland Protocol that's governed by that. But also the other one is in Horizon Europe, the science program, which is like, duh, as soon as Theresa May brought forward her red lines, I thought that doesn't work for science, because with the science program, the EU holds the money, it gives it to the coordinator of the project, and those project coordinators have to be accountable to the giver of the money, which is essentially the ECJ. And even countries like Switzerland sign up to that. And there have been cases under FP7, I think it was, where Swiss and other partners have had to settle disagreements, and it's been settled in the ECJ. Right, so that's your overview. That's your 3 pillars plus Euratom on the side. That's your governance mechanism, which is the Partnership Council, which has 30 sub-councils handling all these different parts. And then you've got your independent arbitration tribunals and some sort of nuclear blow-up clauses that can all be used in order to handle disagreements. Right, so now let's go to goods and transport, and I put these together because they go together. Here is where you've got very, very little disruption in the goods and the transport. And for me, I mean, that's what the EU wanted and that's what the UK wanted, and it was pretty straightforward to do. And I think the EU were dead happy about doing this because this is to their advantage. In our trade between the UK and the EU sends more goods to us than we send to them, okay? They've got the better relationship there, so they want to keep that going without interference. And in fact, it's being touted by the press that in this area of tariffs, no quotas, this is the first trade deal of its kind that the EU has done with any country. It's kind of like, okay, well, 2 factors. One, it's not a big movement from where we are now, but secondly, the EU also has that relationship with about 33 different countries through the Everything But Arms Agreement with developing countries, the vast majority being in Africa. No tariffs, no quotas on everything but arms, weapons. And so, it's not that much of a biggie. However, this tariff-free status isn't completely and utterly across the board because it's dependent upon rules of origin, i.e. you only get this tariff-free status for your goods sending to the EU if, and this varies from product to product, the majority is actually originates from your country. So for example, if we were to buy in rice from Asia, or tuna, or elsewhere, and then process it in the UK and try to sell it into the EU, they'll go, mm-mm. And for cars, for example, there's a rule there that no more than 45% of the parts of the car can come from outside the UK and the EU, right? So if you go like to about half the car coming from outside the UK and the EU, then you get tariffs slapped on that. And there's some wriggle room with electric cars. That's, you know, a particular win. But remember that, because that then actually keeps the UK very much in the EU's orbit, because if the original parts or the original products are coming from the EU, then processed in the UK, then that keeps all of that tight and penalises stuff that comes from further afield. Also, there has to be basic health checks. The sanitary and phytosanitary checks need to happen to a certain degree. That's, you know, about human health, animal health, and plant health. Those checks need to happen at the border. The UK was hoping that would be like super minimal, like the EU has with New Zealand at 1%, but actually it's going to be higher. There's a grace period on the Northern Ireland border, and then there are technical barriers to trade as well, which means with regarding certifying your products that you're selling in a safe for like low risk items, then basically you can do self-certification and say, yeah, this meets EU standards and it's fine. But for higher risk items, then there's more likelihood that it will require third-party certification or certification by the country that you're trying to sort of sell it into. And the member states reserve rights on demanding that and doing those checks. And this is quite far away from what the UK wanted, because it wanted automatic mutual recognition. Okay, so that's goods. What about transporting goods and, to a degree, transporting people? So aviation, maritime and haulage. With aviation, fortunately, pretty much everything gets to continue as before. With aviation safety, there is actually mutual recognition of each other's licenses. And we can send pretty much as many people and as much freight as we want between the UK and the EU. However, if we want to include a third country in the pathway, UK, EU, and then another country, then that comes down to the European member state in question to sign that off. And also, we're not allowed to have UK flight operators do flights within the EU. If you want to do that, you have to set up a subsidiary company. Okay, with maritime, we've still got full access to all the ports. No change there, no problems there. With haulage, this is actually quite a big win, because it was looking for a long time like there'd be lots more certificates for the actual hauliers themselves on their permits and on their permissions, whereas actually that gets to continue to keep going without additional permits. I mean, they've got enough paperwork to do anyway with all of the new rules coming in, so let's not have paperwork on their actual professional jobs here. So that means that Ireland can still transport to the rest of the EU through the UK. There's only one little tweak here, which is on cabotage, which is the amount of time that UK hauliers can spend delivering goods within the EU, and that's reduced. But otherwise, you know, this is all straightforward and continues as before, just with some annoying things on double certifications of some goods, the sanitary and phytosanitary checks, and the limitations on what you can bring in to build your product before sending it forward, the rules of origin. Okay, so that's that done. That's goods and transportation done. Let us now talk about services and mobility, because that goes together as well. Services, this is where the UK has its strength. And this is where we are really quite shafted in terms of this new agreement. So the UK is now really a services economy. This is what we do well. This is what we specialize in. This is what we've built up. And this is where we have a surplus into the EU market. We export far more services into the EU market, the single market, than we get back from the EU. And looking at this deal, it's pretty horrendous on that front, because we meet a whole briar patch of different member states having different limits and regulations about what services we can sell in. I'll come to an example in a sec. But also, very importantly, we do not yet have a set of mutual recognitions of professional qualifications. So there are no, there's a framework to go and explore that. That has been promised as something that's going to come along, but there's a risk that it might not come along, in which case professionals in the UK wanting to sell their professional services into the EU are now shafted. Those that are already doing so before we leave the transition agreement, that's concreted in, that's sorted, that's fine. But going forward, this really, really puts the squeeze on. And this is something that needs to get sorted out on an individual member state basis. So the Institute for Government, interestingly, had a look, for example, at legal services. And it's not even certain in this agreement whether decisions made in UK courts are actually enforceable in the EU. And then if you want to be a lawyer operating in the EU, then it does vary from member state to member state. So comically, for example, if you want to provide legal services in Czechoslovakia and you're from the UK, you have to be resident in that country. Whereas over the border in Austria, you actually have to be out of the country in order to sell in those services. And right across the EU, you can't have Brits in ownership of EU of law firms, and the member states of the EU retain a whole load of rights on banning and blocking legal advice activities in different areas. So that is a real headache. That's legal. Moving on to the big one of the city and financial services. Of course, as you all know, there is no financial passporting for all those different types of services that could be passported across, i.e. given rights in order to provide those financial services on the continent. That is something that is going to be valued and should be forthcoming, but the fact that we haven't got it locked in at this stage is fairly nuts. Now, going with services is, of course, the rights of Brits to go and work in the EU. So mobility now is more limited. You can have short-term business visits that are visa-free, but they're limited to 90 days in each and every 180-day period. So you can be there for 3 months, then you have to pop out and wait another 3 months. Even with intra-company transfers, there's a limit on that to 12 months. So you can only stay for 12 months as part of an intra-company transfer. The good thing, however, is in terms of social security. And in social security, you've got healthcare covered. So EHIC, it's not EHIC, but it's like a copy of EHIC. So basically, you can still access that free healthcare in European countries, as can EU citizens access the NHS in the UK. And you've got state pensions and disability allowance, unemployment allowance, and all of those terms. You've got no discrimination of Brits versus locals in those countries. But I want to come back to healthcare, because this is an important one. If this were not agreed, then essentially you would have to go and get health insurance to travel, work, or live elsewhere in the European Union. And that would be extremely costly for people who've got underlying conditions. It would be costly for us otherwise, because insurance companies will take more money. They are a middleman, they do profit from this. And one of the things I was really concerned about was, firstly, access of people who've got, disabilities or underlying conditions to actually be able to go and travel or retire. But then secondly, I didn't want a whole booming of a health insurance industry, and certainly not Aaron Banks's Go Skippy start profiteering big time from Brits traveling abroad or Europeans coming to the UK. So I'm actually dead pleased about that one. I think that is good and healthy. But for the most part, the summary of the services and mobility section is that in this area where we had the advantage going into the EU market, it's patchy, it's incomplete, and we're pretty shafted. And as you'll see from level playing field considerations, then also there's further risks going forward. So that's a real shame that we're going to be losing out big there. So we've covered overview and governance. We've done goods and transport. We've done services and the mobility that goes with services. Now let's talk about level playing field. This sort of big new element about how we dynamically regulate our relationship going forward. So the whole idea behind the level playing field is that the UK has declared that it wants to have the ability to diverge on regulations, and it could be on subsidies and state aid, it could be on labour and social standards, environment and climate, competition issues, tax avoidance, all of that kind of stuff, right? Which could, in fact, which is meant to give the UK a competitive advantage over the sleepy standards of the European Union. And so the EU is dead concerned that this means that if you've already got the UK sort of woven into the EU market, this isn't like a deal with Canada, like where they're distant, you're distant, and then they can have some access. It's kind of like we've already been granted full access. We're already part of this. Imagine if the UK is locked in and then they suddenly drop standards and outcompete us by treating their workers like crap or polluting the air, and we can't control them. Then basically that drags us right down to race to the bottom. And then they realize later, well, hold on a sec, it's not just about fixing that level. What about if we want to increase our standards, pay our workers better, give them more guarantees, have stricter enforcement of environmental rules? And then the UK doesn't keep up. Where are we after 10 years, after 20 years? Because they can be sitting pretty, holding us back from what we want to do because there's a risk that we're going to be undercut. So what the EU wanted to do initially was to get the UK to align with EU law and keep dynamically aligned with EU law. But this goes against the whole philosophy of Brexit, which is us making our own laws. The UK wanted none of this, or at best a Canada-style deal. What we've actually got is a set of regulations which are stronger than Canada, and quite intense. Now, with all those things that I was saying before, the subsidies, which is effectively state aid when the government's putting more money or grants or tax breaks or any kind of mechanism that helps some companies get ahead of other companies, or when you interfere with labour and social standards, or when you make changes to environmental and climate regulations. In all of those, the thing that we're looking out for is where this has an impact on trade and investment. If it has an impact on trade and investment and means that some companies are going to be more advantaged across borders, that's where action gets taken. And so there's a whole question of how do you prove that that's the case? And I know the Institute for Public Policy Research was saying, we don't like this because it means that the UK can roll back on a whole load of standards, because proving that it impacts on trade and everything is hard to do. That sets a high bar so they can get away with a lot. But I think there's a double-edged sword to this, which is if the government tried to do that and then the UK public say, why the hell are you slashing all these standards? Our government can't say, because it makes us more competitive, because then, whoomph, they completely give, open the door to these rebalancing mechanisms, which are basically the EU can slap on temporary tariffs, and we can slap on the other way around. I like the idea of a race to the top, actually. If we increase animal welfare standards, well, let's give the EU a nudge for them to increase it too. I would like to see it go that way. But anyway, the other side can put on temporary tariffs. It then goes into an arbitration panel, which needs to confirm whether it's fair after about 30 days. If they find that, then the other has to retract in 5 days. But if this goes on badly for a full 4 years, then the whole pillar can be pulled. The whole trade agreements pillar can be pulled. And also, there are mechanisms in here that allow cross retaliation. So not just, within the immediate domain of where the grievance occurred, but things like aviation can get pulled when these kind of things really escalate. So this is one of the nuclear options that sits there, which is all this cross retaliation that can happen and impact road haulage, it can impact aviation, and so it feels like a very aggressive set of dynamics, which means that if the UK diverges at all, we could see some real fireworks here. Okay, let's go on to the next one, fishing, and then we'll do law and justice, and then we get on to science and sort of like have more of a wrap up on that. Fishing. Now, this one to me is fascinating because it was kind of like a fish, my kingdom for a fish. Throw away the city for fish. Throw away the services industries for fish. Our control over the science programs and Galileo, you all for fish, right? And then at the end of the day, Boris Johnson fights for fish and fights fish and then capitulates totally on fish. And the UK asks of an increase to catching 80% of the fish in our waters, and having that phased in over 3 years has gone right out the window. They phrased it as a share of the EU's quota, our share of the EU's quota increasing by 25%, which threw a lot of people. But actually what is meant is that instead of catching half of our own fish, that increases to 2/3, and it is phased in over 5.5 years. So instead of it happening in 3 years, so a win landing for this government in 2024, the year of an election, this has actually been booted on to a 5-year framework, which actually suits the EU's timing, or this 5 years before everything's reviewed, and going from 50% to 66%. Well, that's quite a small sliver of an increase, isn't it? And so fishing campaigners like Fishing for Leave are absolutely hopping mad about this. But wait, it gets worse, because of course, now that they're having to sell the fish into the EU market, they also have to pass increased checks, like the sanitary and phytosanitary checks. And furthermore, there are mechanisms for agreeing how much fish we can all catch together. So the EU and the UK get together on a regular rolling basis to say, what's our total allowable catch? And if they disagree with that, then there's a default mechanism, which is the international standard. And if there are still disagreements there, then this can blow up the whole agreement in other areas, including trade, aviation, and road transport, which means that the EU really hold a nuclear option on this, because they've given the UK very, very little on fish. And if they in the UK disagree heavily going forward, then they can pull the whole agreement, including the UK's agreements on aviation. So that's pretty hardcore. And the EU have a compensation pot of 5 billion for disruptions associated with Brexit, and that will go to the a lot of the coastal things that have given up that small extra proportion for the UK. Right, last one before we do science: law and justice. With law and justice, the main thing that we want is access to the databases and access to people who have fled our country to the EU. So with the databases, we do have continued access to the PRUM fingerprint database and the passenger name records database, but having live access to the big EU database, SIS2, that keeps records of missing people and missing objects. We've lost that real-time access. We've lost the login. We can make requests, but we've lost the logins. And this is important because in 2019, UK police accessed this database nearly 600 million times, right? So that's something that we've lost. Also, in terms of the European arrest warrant, whereby if someone flees our country and goes to, you know, Costa del Sol, and we can say, oi, can we have them back? And they say yes. We've lost that. However, there's a new mechanism now called the surrender mechanism, which sort of replaces that. It's a bit slower and it's a bit more clunky, but it's replaced. But here's the kicker, which is part of this pillar on law and justice. We only have access to, ongoing access to, if we remain fully supportive of the European Court of Human Rights. And that's really, really going to trigger some Brexiteers. From Theresa May to the ERG, a lot of them wanted us out of the European Court of Human Rights, and that basic set of rights about how we treat and handle people. And so that if we badmouth that, I mean, if we undermine it or if we withdraw from it, then we could lose this whole pillar and all of that access and collaboration in that area. Also, with data, and we'll do data in a second, if we're in breach of certain data regulations, then also we can lose access to that pillar, right? So all of that was all the trivial stuff. Now let's talk about science quickly. Okay, so first thing that everyone thinks about with science is the Horizon Europe program, which follows Horizon 2020. It's the next 7-year program, 80 billion. We are actually buying into it. And that's a closer shave than you would think. Cheers to science. Because for a while, it was looking like there was a lot of disagreement in government whether they thought that it was worthwhile buying into the science program. A lot of, you know, people mouthing off about, oh, you know, it costs more than it's worth, you know, how do you evaluate that? We might not. But we've got, it still needs to be formalized and agreed because it's you know, a package associated with this deal. But it looks like the agreement is there on us buying into Horizon Europe. All of it, apart from the new European Innovation Council, which, you know, funds innovative projects. Now, with Horizon Europe, we pay 4% of operational costs as a sort of like baseline, and then on top of that, we pay in according to our GDP. So pretty much in the same way that Switzerland and Israel and other third countries were buying in from outside, and they were actually doing well on that basis. They were making back more than they were putting in. So there's a good shot that the UK could do the same, but for the fact, of course, that our participation in Horizon 2020 has been dropping off over the last few years. I've done some analysis of it, and in the last year, we've dropped past Germany, France, Spain, and Italy in terms of our participations, and we've lost, by my calculation, you know, we used to be the top, and now we've dropped to, what's that, 5th place or whatever. And we've lost, you know, over £1 billion over the last 4 years from where we would have been if we'd kept level with Germany as we were before. It's tragic. But we now can build back into that. But just so long as all of this is stable, because unlike being a full EU member, firstly, we don't get a say over this program, but secondly, there's all these clauses about potential unilateral termination in 45 days by either the EU or the UK. They've both got those rights. And if there's 4 years of disagreements, I think, then there can be an automatic outright termination of the whole thing as well. So that kind of makes me a bit nervous that there are various different conditions by which, you know, all of this can be suspended and broken. It makes it a bit more unstable and uncertain. All right. Other science-related programs are Copernicus, which is the satellite system that is Earth mapping and can detect floods and gives important data feedback about climate change and so forth and so on. There's Galileo, and we'll have access to civilian parts of Galileo, but not the super tight military data. That is such a shame, seeing as we put in well over a cool billion into that. Of course, we've already lost the European Medicines Agency from London to Amsterdam. That had 900 employees, highly specialized, 320 million turnover, 40,000 business visits per annum. We've lost that. And I don't know where we are with rare diseases networks, funds for orphan drugs for rare diseases, or pharmacovigilance, which is basically monitoring of side effects for drugs in the wider market. I couldn't find any of that by searches in the 1,200-page trade treaty. So I'm asking people in the Commission about that. Then there's going to be issues of data. And with data, essentially, the EU still need to approve that our data safety and records are good. And they haven't done that yet. So we've got a grace period of 4 to 6 weeks, after which a decision needs to happen. I think that's looking increasingly likely now, but it's meant that lots of companies have had to already put contracts in place, put contingency plans in place, but that's going to be a big one, as is going to be sharing materials between labs and whether they need customs checks and declarations and sanitary and phytosanitary checks. There's the regional development funds, which we are out of. So the European-wide levelling up, we're no longer part of. European Investment Bank, I believe we're out of. Erasmus Plus, we have lost. I've done another video on that. I think it's absolutely nuts that this program, which not only sent 17,000 youth a year around Europe, but also brought in 32,000 into our universities and towns, to lose all of that and to replace it with not an immediate thing, but a future thing that spends less money to send our students further and gets none of them coming back, to me sounds like such a shame. And as Nicola Sturgeon said, it's cultural vandalism not to maintain those networks and those links and that flow and all of those opportunities. Sure, complement it with something else, but to actually blow this up, something that's mature and works, in order to replace it with a future pipe dream, that is letting down our youth right now. We lose access to the REACH chemicals database. That's going to cost another cool billion for new registrations there. In terms of inward investment, that's all going to get hurt, but that's not in the trade deal, so let's not talk about that. In terms of Euratom, as I mentioned before, we still get access to those collaborative programs and movement of materials by an agreement with the Euratom Treaty. And in terms of ITER, the big nuclear fusion reactor in France, we used to associate to that through the EU. We're now going to associate to that again through the EU, but by a different bolt-on route like the one that Switzerland is using, rather than do it independently. Right, and I'll call it a day there, unless there's anything in, the energy frameworks, that's a bit trivial. There's no big changes there. And intellectual property, things largely continue as before with mutual recognitions, although we're not part of the unitary patent system. And yeah, that's about it. That's your lot. So what is my summary of this? My summary of this is that there's no wins here for the UK. There's really no wins. We don't get any extra fish, really, like maybe a few scattered haddock. We don't get any real benefits from being able to make our own rules in terms of regulation with regard to services or goods, because either we shadow the EU now to have, the full access, or the reduced access that we have without a say, or we decide to diverge, in which case we risk kicking off everything, and the very advantage that we crave is going to be neatly and proportionally rebalanced by a loss of market access. So what is that? It means that you have that advantage has to apply through then our other trade deals around the world, and they might have similar concerns about us. So it doesn't make sense. There is no economic win there to be had whatsoever. What you've got here is you've got a threadbare temporary agreement that moves the UK outside the EU, hovers in this pattern here with a whole load of regulatory councils and mechanisms sucking up millions and millions a year, so that we're not in here having a voice, but rather we're watching how the EU develops. The only thing that where we actually have additional power actually is if we were to increase our standards in some key areas and then demand that the EU does the same, so that it isn't unbalancing for us. And so then we've got, you know, slightly more power there than we would inside the EU, just like having votes on it. But that's the only thing I can think of. The rest of it is just like, and even that's like highly speculative, right? But the rest of it is just this threadbare thing holding us together with so many opportunities for fights and battles to kick off, and with such a loss of voice and increase in friction that basically it is, as most people say, it's a pretty rubbish deal, and there's not even a win on fishing communities. And I kind of feel for them because they've been led up the garden path on that front. So there you go. I mean, that's where we are. I think in terms of pro-European campaigning, I think, you know, the very fact that it's a mess, that will have new red tape in, that it will constantly niggle and hurt, gives us plenty of opportunity over the years to try and build closer with Europe. You know, more citizen rights in each other's countries, building back to free movement. Why not? We're the only Western European country that doesn't have it now. More, you know, a recognition of qualifications, and maybe we'll have to make some trade-offs there. I think we really need to rebuild where we are in science and set up some bilaterals with Eastern Europe and try and find, you know, new policy mechanisms whereby we can engage there. But everything to me screams that, you know, this is fragile, and either we rip it up more ERG style, or we say, right, from here, from this shoddy platform, we can see that it's worse outside than it is inside. Let's build back with Europe in a bespoke way, and through the development of new structures, regain our place within Europe. And you never know, maybe even one day rejoin. But that's certainly where I would like things to go. So, you know, cheers to all of you. And as I always say in these videos, please follow the Patreon link, become a patron, just small monthly contribution, because then this has our back in perpetuity. And to have that stable support stream just means we can just do more analysis, more videos, keep going, know that it's solid, know that it's stable, grow on that basis. So that would mean the world if you just, you know, become, what have we got now? About 160 Patreons. If we get that to 1,000, we are sorted. We're just totally sorted for this year, next year, the year after, 2024, here we come. So that would be magic if you could help out too. And then I will hop onto some of the channels and have a look at these comments that are popping up. Yeah, I'm looking at some of them now. Cheers, my wife. Thank you very much. And I will catch you later. President of what? All right, cool. See you later. Build back with Jose. I like that one. Yes, I agree. That is an awesome slogan. Rebuild with Europe. Build back with Europe. Build back better with Europe. All right. Catch you later.